And I hope that we're joined now by Leif Johansson, a non-executive chair of the board of AstraZeneca. Leif, nice to see you. You've got an audience of about 120 here, I think, if my calculation is right. But what we'd like to hear from you is how AstraZeneca has adapted and what you have been enduring, but also how you are preparing for the urgency of what more is coming down the track. In other words, how have you adapted corporately?
Very good. I'll be happy to do that, and happy also to engage in any questions afterwards. It's very good to be with you. We are actually speaking from a very snowy Sweden here. We have had more snow than we normally have in a month, in a couple of days. So it's been exciting to go to the office today. I thought that what I would do, I would give you just a short summary of what we have done, but then more go into what are the lessons for the future. And I think the best way to describe what happened in March 2020, now a year and a half ago, was really that we were asked a question that was, can you help? And that question came to us from Oxford University and from the British government. And the whole idea was to say that Oxford University felt that they had very good science that could be, if properly industrialized and commercialized, could be something that would have a good impact on the whole of the pandemic. We did not ask or answer the question, is this a good strategy? Is this something that the company would like to do for a very long while, etc.? We were just saying that in this very unique situation, and we believe it is a very unique situation, then we said, try to answer the question, how can you help? How can we help? So we started saying, yes, we think we can. And we started looking at how to build supply chains, how to industrialize Oxford's very good, I should say, R&D. And then by now, we have actually made more than 2 billion, quite a lot more than 2 billion doses for 170 countries around the world. And we started deliveries, if you remember, March 2020, we actually started deliveries already in January 21, so a very short time. So 2 billion doses delivered, 170 countries, 9 months into the program, or a year and a half since we started, we said we would do that. So what are the lessons learned? So I think we have a number of lessons learned, and I think for innovation and speed, a little the subject of today's seminar, but also when it comes to resilience and sustainability. First of all, I think the biggest lesson for innovation and speed, and potentially also for future resilience and sustainability of healthcare, is actually go to places you don't normally go to. Try to find new input into whatever you're thinking about doing, and then go and do it. In our case, that meant going to academia. We are not normally running cooperation programs with academia in that way. And we said AstraZeneca and Oxford, both in places we don't normally go to, we can actually do wonderful things together. It's also interesting to note that Pfizer-BioNTech is actually the marriage between a small company and a very large company. So in many ways, you can say not the normal processes of how things were developing. But go to places you normally don't go to. Then we made another quite controversial decision, which was not-for-profit. And it's interesting to note that the not-for-profit discussion was actually controversial from those who felt that we should have had a hefty profit to everything that we were doing, to those who said that we really would like you to give it away for free and try to save the world with doing that. And of course, we ended up with a controversial decision right in between there. We felt that it was justified in a very unique situation. You can make unique decisions, but it was never meant to be a big argument in terms of whether companies should make money on the pharmaceutical products or whatever that they are doing. It was a unique situation and a unique decision, but one we felt was very much justified. We then built around 15 supply chains around the world, and we thought that that was a great thing for resilience, and we would be able to balance those out between different countries and be able to have the most efficient supply. In this case, you make the active products and then you actually fill and finish and then you distribute. So it's quite a lengthy production and manufacturing process. Now, what really turned out, which I think we need to be thinking about next time we have a pandemic, was something that is, in a sloppy term, can be called vaccine nationalism. Basically, many countries, many continents decided that their absolute foremost priority would be to supply their own population with vaccine. And that meant actually not honoring export agreements or other agreements that had been made in the meanwhile. Now, if we see how that is going to roll out next time around, you can say, we will then have a very high amount of protectionism in different countries, and we would then have to duplicate factories in many, many countries rather than be able to rely on larger factories to supply at least parts of the world. That's the consequence that I would like to steer away from. I think it would be much better if we could, through WTO or whether we could in bilateral or multilateral agreements, we could agree to honor priorities that were made at the time when preparing for pandemic rather than when we are right into it. Otherwise, we will have a very not efficient vaccine factory apparatus that we should deal with. Then I think a very good lesson for all of us, certainly we in business, but also from a government's point, would be to be prepared to fund at risk these types of products. And what really happened here was that there is an agency in the US called BARDA. It's called Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA, have been around for decades, and they are preparing and were an institution that were prepared to offer R&D support, but also be able to order products. Similar setup in the UK. And I think we are beginning to see now the European Commission come towards that lesson and set up something called HERA, which is Health Emergency Response Authority. I think it's quite important to recognize that, first of all, there is a funding issue. Mr. Trump, of course, takes credit for having funded BARDA in such a way that they were able to launch vaccines, and they funded quite a few different vaccines. And I think rightfully so, that institution was there. I think we in the EU, but also in Europe, perhaps need to be both having set up funding, but also having be able to institutionalize how that funding should be spent. So the real issue there is on protectionism. How can we deal with that in the future? How will we be able to fund at risk these types of R&D efforts and development? And I'm quite enthusiastic that we will have learned those lessons quite well. I'm often asked, how could you do this so much quicker than what you can normally do? And of course, the real reason, aside from wonderful science and clinical trials, etc., that were done very well, is that if you have two arms, we normally do in the pharmaceutical industry, one which is a placebo arm and one which is the vaccine arm. If you do that and then you try to reach a significant statistical meaningful difference between the placebo arm and the vaccine arm, if you have something that is so contagious and so well spread as this virus was, then that takes not a long while. The infection rates are very quick. So you actually can come up and say vaccinated people are much better than the placebo. That's the real reason for why this went so quickly. And hopefully we will have something which is less contagious, but I think we can trust the same type of mechanisms. So we will be able to deliver vaccines. The industry will be able to deliver vaccines at shorter rates than what we were actually prepared to do in the beginning of 2020. But all in all, I think we can say this is really the victory of science and the victory of cooperation across barriers and borders. And also, if you look at what is happening now in terms of new variants, etc., the preparedness to deal with that is quite different. And let me end with two, I think, reflections. First of all, people ask me all the time, how were you able to turn on the 75,000 people or so at AstraZeneca to really work day and night and be able to set up new supply chains, etc., at a speed twice the speed or sometimes 3 times the speed that we would normally be able to do? And the real answer to that is, from my point of view, not a problem at all. The internal motivation to be part of something like this, which is an effort that we normally don't do, go out of their normal ways, go out of their normal holidays or other things, was not a problem at all. People want to be part of companies that are trying to do the right thing. The second one was, were you really prepared for all of the media, etc.? And I think it's fair to say, no, we weren't. But I think that's something that we could have thought through better. When you're dealing with something that is literally very important for 100% of the Earth's population, then you actually are dealing with something that is literally on the political leadership side worth 100% attention. And that probably means 150% of the world's media comes your way and have lots of questions and want to be able to discuss what you're doing. I think all of that we could have thought through better, and hopefully companies like ours next time around will be prepared better for that. So those were the short story of what we did since March 2020 until now. We did it at record speed. I think we have delivered more than 2 billion doses, and we are quite happy with having contributed to all of that.
Leif, thank you.
Some lessons of
thank you very much.
And learnings there. Thank you.
Right, Leif, don't go yet, because I want to actually put to you, and we talked about this beforehand, about your relationship with government. And in the minds of many people sitting in this room will be what Kate Bingham, who led the UK's COVID vaccine task force, said, both in an article in the Times last week and then in an excoriating lecture at Oxford University, the annual lecture, where she said essentially, and it's about the British government, I know, but many governments simply are not well prepared to understand the enormity of what needs to be done and what they need to understand themselves. She said governments were not prepared with a wartime mentality, her words, to handle the enormity and the speed with the agility and nimbleness that is necessary. What is your reflection on that quickly, if you can?
Yeah, I think you can say this was a new situation for all of us. It was certainly new for us. I think companies in the main have the ability to make decisions like I just described at a quicker rate. I think governments in many ways have slower and more difficult decision processes. But I think we should all have respect for, when I listen to Kate Bingham's comments, that we should all have respect that this was indeed something quite new that came our way. And hopefully we are much wiser people now than we used to be.
But do you think governments need to step up with public servants, having greater expertise to be able to handle this? We know what's happening now with the latest variant, that this is now going to be something which is going to be repeating with uncertainty, but with enormous economic and societal implications.
Absolutely. I think we can all say we need to draw the lessons from what has happened here. We certainly need, and I was into that, institutionalize and finance research in such a way they were better prepared. And I think that's certainly true of many government agencies, government aspects of what we're doing. Healthcare, the whole of the healthcare system is an example of that. we at Astra, I am as chairman, we are working a lot with setting up resilient and sustainable healthcare systems around the world and trying to compare lessons from different countries and then roll them in to a number of countries that are participating in that. George Freeman, who is now with the government again, instituted that. Mr. Barroso is on board, also former EU commissioner, president. So yes, absolutely. I think we should take to heart experiences and learnings here, and then make sure that we come at this at a much more qualified rate than we did this time around.
Leif, thank you very much indeed for joining us from snowy Stockholm. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
What we want to move